Say my name. I am awake. I am the danger. I am the one who knocks.
Welcome back. Here we are, breaking into Breaking Bad with Clifford and Caleb Humphrey. Today we're discussing Season 5, Episode 7, Say My Name. This is an epic episode. Caleb, you want to do the honors and give us a little recap of what happens?
Absolutely. So if you guys recall, the last episode ended with Walt saying that he has a plan on what to do with the predicament that Walt, Mike, and Jesse find themselves in, with Mike and Jesse wanting out and then wanting to sell the methylamine or the remaining methylamine to the other company. And we find out that Walt wants to basically sell their partnerships to this other cartel per se, and ends up having one of the most iconic lines in the show with "Say My Name." It takes a really sharp turn towards the end of the show with the demise of Mike, and it's really tough to watch this episode because Mike is one of my favorite characters in the show, and watching his character develop all the way until the very end was pretty brutal to watch, but another thing that what makes this show so great. But we'll get into the nuances of the rest of the episode, but that was the main takeaway, and we see that Jesse ends up pulling the plug and getting out of the business as well. And so yeah, we're excited to dive into this one.
Okay, so the title obviously comes from the line in the intro. So we'll just get right into the intro. The intro is when Walt and Mike and Jesse meet with the guys that Mike was going to sell their methylamine to. And Walt kind of surprises them by saying, no, we're not going to sell you the methylamine. Actually, we want you guys to work for us and be the distribution, and we'll continue to make the the meth. And the guy, at first, he says, who is this guy? And Walt, I think what he does is he kind of banks on his reputation being known, and then he lets that guy know, I'm that guy that you've heard of. And he reveals himself more and more, and then he says, I'm the guy who killed Gus Fring. And then he wants the other guy to connect the dots, and he says, say my name. Who am I? You know who I am. And so he says, you're Heisenberg. And that's when the guy clicks, like, oh man, okay, well, I recognize now that you do make the superior meth. So anyway, so it's kind of a bold move. But anyway, that's where the title for the episode comes from, and that's basically the whole of the intro. But it looks like Walt gets his way, and he's going to get to continue to produce the meth, and he's got somebody else who's going to take care of the distribution. So finally, no more violence, right? It's just going to be, manufacturing, no more violence. Real safe. That's kind of where Walt thinks things are headed.
Right. OSHA certified, everything's on the up and up, right?
Yes, absolutely. So it's funny, Mike is saying, hey, I'm out, and I need you to kind of find a way to cover, get me out of the business. He says, I'm gonna pay my guys up, and then you won't have to worry about that anymore. And Jesse's like, yeah, me too. And Walt's like, yeah, no, we'll talk, Jesse, we'll talk. And there's a kind of manipulation happening there where Jesse's like, why am I always in this predicament where I tell him I'm out and then he tells me I'm not? And,
Right.
So that's happening. And then the other thing, you didn't mention this in the summary, but it's kind of a big part of the episode, I think, is that Hank is getting closer and closer. And we get an inside look into how Mike has been able to keep his guys paid in a way that hitherto Hank has not been able to decipher, and it's because he has his lawyer. I don't know how it's where he sweet talks the bank woman into letting him make these deposits kind of secretly because she's a woman who enjoys food and he always brings her sweets or
Right.
something. It's kind of a funny bribe, but yeah, that's how humans work sometimes, I guess. So that's this little way that Mike has been able to operate, and throughout the episode, Hank gets closer and closer. He gets a little bit of a setback because he gets criticized by his boss for being too involved in the Gus Fring case, which I guess I'm trying to imagine from their perspective, the case is kind of over and that is gone. And but Hank is like, no, there's still blue meth out there, and in his mind, it's not Gus wasn't the main target. It was really Heisenberg who he's kind of been chasing this whole time.
Right. I also think that it probably didn't shed a good light on the DEA of Albuquerque, knowing that Gus Fring was heavily involved as a fundraiser for the DEA. And
Right.
so they don't want this to be in the limelight anymore. They kind of want this to be done with. Like, listen, we got the bad guy, everything's good. You have a whole department to look after. Don't worry about this anymore.
Right. Yeah, and I was reminded of the scene at Hank and Marie's house when they have Walt and Skylar over, where it looks like the case is over, and Walt is the one who plants the seed of doubt in
Hmm.
Hank's mind and says, "Well, what if Gus wasn't the real guy? What if your guy is still out there?" And if you remember in that scene, Walt's a little tipsy from the wine, and but I mean, he really shoots himself in the foot because he was on the cusp of kind of getting Hank off of his trail completely,
Yep.
and yet he couldn't stand for someone else to Gale I guess at the time to take the glory that
Yeah.
presumably was his.
His ego got in
So
the way.
right. So we're going to come back to that word in the at the end of this episode, but
Mhm.
just kind of setting it up. Um, Eventually, Hank figures out who the lawyer is who's been depositing these funds, and he's able to get the funds and shut down Mike's operation. So now there's a crisis because those guys are liabilities for Walt, and so we're gonna sort of see where that goes. But before we sort of jump ahead a little bit, so Mike retires. He throws all of his weapons into the well. He's getting ready to just say goodbye to the whole business, and he's gonna set he's gonna set up his guys. He's gonna set up his granddaughter, and then I don't know. He's gonna move to Florida and live on the beach or something, and that's his plan. But alas, it's not to be. I do appreciate when Hank shows up with the DEA to search his house.
Remember, Hank comes in very confident that he's going to find something, and then it very quickly he sees that he's kind of been outsmarted by Mike, and that there's nothing in the on the premises that he's going to find.
Right. But Hank is still convinced that somewhere there's a link between Mike and Heisenberg, and so he turns his obsession onto that, and that's what he gets dinged for because he was what's the head of the DEA doing making this being boots on the ground. He's supposed to be in the office making phone calls, and here he is getting too personally involved. So that that comes back to bite Hank, but he's been in this position before when everybody told him that no, this case isn't going to be resolved, move on to other things,
Right.
and then he finds a lead and he's kind of back in the limelight. But okay, so Walt is trying to convince Jesse to stay in the business, and it's interesting here when we're trying to think what are the motives that are at play here. We know that there's money, just greed, which is a pretty common motive, but it's kind of a low motive. And it's clear throughout the whole show and in this episode that Walt is in it for much more than the money. And he said explicitly, was it the last episode or the one before that, that he's not in the money business. He's in the empire business.
Mm-hmm.
He wants the glory. But he tells Jesse, look, you're every as bit as good as me. You could get a lab of your own. So he's appealing to Jesse's own sense of glory, right? Like you can be a little king and of a little kingdom as well. And you can make, a lot of money. And Jesse doesn't want that, or at least if he does want money, he's made the calculation that he'd rather have, a bird in the hand, as they say, better than two in the bush. So he'd rather have the money that's right there, because that's more than he's ever had. And so he'd rather just sell out and move on.
He doesn't want anyone to get hurt anymore. And
right.
He is fully of the opinion now that if they stay in business, someone gets hurt always. And he's not under that illusion anymore, even though that Walt keeps repeating it to himself and tries to repeat it to Jesse, saying, now that we are in control, no one gets hurt. And right away he responds with, that's bullshit, and you know it. So
yeah,
Walt is still, I don't know if that was just salesmanship or what, or, but Jesse's just, he'd rather even give up making any more money, and eventually walks away from the 5 million, it looks like, because he doesn't even deal with it anymore.
Well, right. So Walt, it's revealing about how Walt thinks of Jesse. He uses various arguments to try and get him to stay in the business. He first appeals to a sense of glory that Walt himself has. Don't you want to be, have your own lab? Won't that be great? You'll be in charge, and that doesn't work. So he says, well, you could make a lot more money this way. That doesn't work. And it's because for Jesse, when he's weighing thing, pros and cons, he has on his list of cons, someone's probably going to get killed. And for him, that outweighs everything else. And it's funny, Walt even says, look, if there's a hell out there, we're pretty much already going. So if you're concerned about the salvation of your soul, forget about that. Like, we're kind of screwed. And if you remember, however many episodes ago it was, 1 or 2 episodes ago, he says, look, there's time for soul searching later. We'll get right with God once we kind of get secure, but let's just do that first. But there's plenty of time for that.
Right.
But Jesse's like, no, I can't, my soul can't afford that, to have another person, dead on my account. I'm going to have to, that's not worth it for me. So it's just interesting that Walt is appealing to material, earthly goods, and he's even appealing to a heavenly soul realm to try and get Jesse to stay in the business. And Jesse's just not having it. So then he resorts to threats. And he says, well, you can't have this money because it's blood money. And if you're trying to be moral and concerned about right and wrong here, then you can't really enjoy this money because it's been earned with it's tainted money. And so, you shouldn't want it. And Jesse gets so frustrated. He seems to throw up his hands and say, fine, then I'll I'm not going to take it. So he says, if you leave, you get nothing. And rather than kind of go ballistic on him or try and pull a gun on him and get the money, Jesse just leaves. And I was thinking about that. It reminded me of the time way back, when Jesse wanted out and Walt hides his money, right? And it's because Walt tells himself, well, if Jesse gets this money, he'll use it to buy drugs and that'll be bad. And then Jane's the one who finds a way to blackmail Walt into forcing him to bring the money. But it's interesting at this time, Jesse refuses to do that. And maybe because he doesn't want to get involved. He doesn't even want to use a kind of violence, a kind of force, even against Walt to get his money. He's so fed up with the violence that has already happened. And so he's taking a major hit. And he also doesn't seem to be in a state of depression. I mean, maybe I'm wrong here, but in the past he's been flipping about money when he's depressed, but he doesn't really seem to be in that state of mind here. Okay, so then Walt then finally lets him go and has to turn to Todd. who's this character that we still don't really know a lot about, but he's the one who pulled the gun and killed the kid. That's all we know. But that tells us that he's got skin in the game. I mean, he's already got guilt. He's invested, and so Walt resorts to a kind of teacher mentality again in the lab, and now just listen and apply yourself.
Yeah,
and it sounds like the old chemistry teacher again.
yeah.
And
The one thing about Todd though is similar to Jesse is that he knows that he can. Well, he believes that he can at least harness and control him just like he could with Jesse, especially since he has certain things over him, like with the whole murdering of the child out in the desert. But I think he did have a little bit of respect because Todd said when he asked him, like, hey, we got to talk about money. He's like, well, we could talk about money when I get my head wrapped around all this. And I think he was like, okay, he's going to apply himself. So that this is good. But
right.
also at the same time, it's like he's going to have to start from square one again. He had already taught Jesse everything, and Jesse can do it all by himself at this point. So there's a lot starting over.
Yeah, we've seen people learn how to do the lab, in the past. What was the name of the guy, the Mexican guy who worked for Gus, who was watching them and
Victor?
Figured out how Victor, yeah. And remember that scene where Victor shows Gus that he knows how to do the whole operation himself, and he doesn't understand any of the chemistry, right? And
Right.
we saw this when Jesse and Walt go down to Mexico, and he's like, "I need the barrel that's got the B on it," or whatever. And
Right.
like, he doesn't really know what he's doing. He just knows he takes so much of this and add it to that and turn this on. That he doesn't really know he doesn't understand the chemistry, but he knows enough. And so it's pretty feasible that Todd could figure this out. He's not going to be able to, again, analyze problems and figure out complex chemistry issues, but
Right.
it's feasible that he can figure this out, and he's determined to do that. So at this point, it looks hopeful. Yeah, okay, Todd's interested. He's invested, and he might turn out to be a fine lab assistant. So we'll have to see where that goes. Meanwhile, there was a scene back at Walt's house that was interesting, I thought. It's him and Skylar, and they're eating microwavable dinners, and Skylar's pouring herself large glasses of wine, like we've seen. But it just communicated to me that they're not living well. They've got tons of money.
Yep.
And yet they're eating microwavable dinners.
Right.
They haven't.
Another point in the money does not buy happiness situation, although he clings for it.
Right. So he hasn't mastered the art of enjoying money as a gangster in the midst of danger all the time. You could get caught at any moment, and so you kind of want to learn how to enjoy your winnings while you have them.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, he's still not very good at that. So Hank's guys catch up with, like we said, with Mike's lawyer. They trace it all back. They figure it out, and Mike kind of panics and knows he has to make an escape, basically.
Well, Walt went to go remove the bug out of Hank's office, and overhears Gomi telling Hank that, hey, they flipped the lawyer, and that we're gonna go pick up Mike. And so Walt calls Mike and warns him, and Mike was literally at the park with his granddaughter, and he's like, hey, they're coming for you. And he sees all the cops coming, and so he takes off.
Yeah. So Mike is in a panic mode, and Walt is too. And we know that because he acts impulsively.
Mm-hmm.
He's desperate. He wants to help Mike escape, and that's noble, but he does it. He wants to do it on the condition that Mike gives him the names of the guys that are in prison that could flip on him, because Walt knows that he's not safe provided that. And when Mike refuses to do that and wants his money so he can escape, Walt pulls out a gun and shoots him. And it's only then. It's interesting that he says it out loud. He thinks that we get to hear his thought, which is, oh, I could have gotten the names from Lydia. I didn't need to just shoot Mike, but I just did. It's sad. He says, just let me die in peace because you've already made your choice. You've shot me, and now I'm gonna die. And though it was an unnecessary death, that's part of the calculus that Jesse knew was part of the whole situation. You cannot get invested in this business and it not eventually and always lead to unintended, unforeseen, tragic violence.
I don't think up until that point, that conversation between Mike and Walt, had somebody ever called Walt out that had cut deep enough to Walt attacking his ego. And the him just saying, like, we had a good thing with Gus, we had a lab, we had distribution, we had everything, but you had to come blow it up, and you could have made all the money you ever wanted plus more, and it's all because of you. And you could see it on Walt's face that he was he was telling the truth, but he just could not take it, and it just overwhelmed him. And like you said, he was sporadic with his decisions, and he just made it a calculation. And it's just sad to see a character that I think, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but Hank's character wasn't even supposed to be in this show. He was written in to,
You mean Mike?
oh, sorry, yeah, Mike. Mike's character was written in this show because he needed to fill in because Saul's character was in the midst of another show that he was filming. Saul was
Right.
supposed to be the Mr. Fix-It guy that had the relationship with Gus. And so they wrote in Mike's character, and he became so beloved, as from a fan base point of view. And, to see
They
him
kept him in.
go like that is,
Yeah.
is tough.
No, I think you made a really good point, which is it's not simply true that Walt was panicking and he shot Mike because he was a liability or he was angry for not giving him the names. It's because Mike names the primary motive in Walt. He says, this falling apart is on you, Walter. You and your pride and your ego. And so, yes, Walt is panicking. Yes, tensions are kind of high all around, but in particular, I think he resented Mike calling him out for that and blaming it all on him. Because in Walt's mind, it's not his fault. It's all these other, it's these accidental figures and things that are happening all around him. But he's the really rational one. He's the mastermind. We know from the very beginning of the episode, say my name, I'm Heisenberg, I am the all powerful, all knowing one. And so I think you're right. Part of and maybe the main reason why he shoots Mike is because he's angry at him for calling that out. I don't think there's really anything else to add to this episode. We're left with Walt's in a difficult place. He's got a newbie lab assistant. He's got now Mike's blood on his hands. He's got Hank nipping at his heels on the case. And he's got commitments out with these other, drug lords to provide the meth. And he's going to have to find a way to deliver all of that in the midst of the circumstances that he's in. And it seems at this point that Jesse is now out of the picture. So Walt is in a very precarious place.
Yeah.
And have to see where it goes from here. I don't remember what happens next. I know you do, but
yes, I do. Yeah, we only got about I think maybe 6 or 7 episodes left, so it a lot still left to happen.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe at this point, no more violence. Maybe this was the last one, and Walt can
now that Walt is firmly in control.
Yes.
Nothing else.
Absolutely. Yeah. What's the worst that can happen at this point?
I can't think of a thing.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening in. And we're zoning in here on the end of the show, and things are kind of getting to a pretty critical place. So we appreciate it if you would like this show on YouTube or podcast, Apple Podcast, wherever you're listening to it. We appreciate it also if you shared it with anyone who you think might be interested. It's not too late to catch up and binge listen to all the episodes and get caught up. So we'll see what happens next time we break into the next episode of Breaking Bad.